So I'm not really a big TV show guy, but one of the things that caught my eye when I was scanning through Netflix, which I do probably once a month, is the new quarterback show, which is why I'm thankful that it came out pretty much at the perfect time, where I actually got to see it on time. But it was actually it was very interesting. It was something that I didn't actually know. I might have been living under a rock, but I had no idea it was coming. And it was super. It was a very interesting idea to me, just out of from the standpoint of it was very clear the inspiration was coming from the F1 show. All of a sudden, I'm drawing a blank, which is kind of strange considering I watched it. That's what it is. And I'm actually an F1 fan, and from that standpoint, I thought they did a pretty good job. Like obviously, the big thing that everybody's getting from it is obviously they didn't quite hit that Drive to Survive really did hit in just how good of a job they did showing the behind the scenes. But I still think they did a killer job. I don't know about you, Caleb.
I thought so. I'm not all the way through it yet. I'm about halfway, but what I've seen from it so far has it's been I've really enjoyed it. It's been good. I think the biggest thing for me is that as someone who is a huge football fan, it feels like it's not quite catered to me. It feels like it is a little bit more catered to people who either know very little about football or haven't watched a game of football in their life. And I think that's completely okay. Like, I know for me, my mom has started getting a little bit more into football because she saw the show on Netflix and was curious and watched it. And so now I have my mom asking me about Kirk Cousins, which is something I never thought would happen. So for that, I think it works really well. I think it's awesome, and the way they structure their episodes is it's not week by week. They'll kind of go all over the place. They between the different quarterbacks, but also they'll jump back and forth because they've got more of a theme. So I know some of the episodes that I remember, there's homecoming. So it was Kirk Cousins going back to Washington, Mariota going up to Seattle because he played college football up in Oregon, and then Mahomes going back to Texas Tech to get his number retired. There's a common theme there. And it was the same thing with a bunch of other episodes. The last one I watched was all about game preparation and what quarterbacks do to memorize the playbook and game plan. And you see that throughout, and they highlight one specific game where that was paramount. The biggest one that I remember for me was there was another episode about dealing with the physical toll of being a quarterback, and they played the ending of that episode was the crazy Vikings-Bills game, one of the best games of the year, and just showing the physical toll that it was taking on Kirk Cousins. And it's great because I think it provides a good baseline to show what the quarterback position is all about. And in essence, because of how important the quarterback is, how it also shows what the game of football is all about, which I think is awesome, and I think it's a great way to introduce new people to the sport. But for me, as a football fan who knows a lot, I kind of prefer something like Hard Knocks, just because it goes a little bit more in depth onto, it goes into the show assuming you know what football is. You're generally not going to go into Hard Knocks not knowing something about the team you're watching. But for quarterback, it very much felt like this was an introduction to Mahomes, Kirk Cousins, Mariota. It didn't go in assuming anything, which I think is great, but personally not my favorite. I'll still watch it, I still enjoy it, but I can tell it's not catered for me.
Yep, and I feel like you hit it right at the end there, right where I was going to jump on there actually, where it's definitely catered more around the personalities of the quarterbacks, which is something that I want to touch more on later when we get into who we think they should bring in for season 2. But I think that from the standpoint of knowing what they were going or trying to do by trying to make something that's similar to Drive to Survive, it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't catered for a fan like you or necessarily me. It was more to bring new fans in, which is exactly what Drive to Survive is. I know plenty of people, not including myself, but I know that it did have a factor in the getting into F1. I know a lot of people who got into it from watching that Netflix series because it really did a good job just giving you a general idea of what it's all about, introducing you to the personalities of racing and all of that, right? It did an excellent job doing that. And from that standpoint, I think they did a pretty killer job. I think that while I don't have a lot of issues with it, I want to get into asking you about like just around just preferences for what you thought in general as a general review of it. But did you have like a favorite? Obviously, they bounced back or bounced in between all three quarterbacks. Did you have a favorite that you kind of like to watch? Because I definitely did. I think most people did.
I feel like the stock answer is probably Kirk Cousins, and I think
Yeah.
so too. Like he has a great personality. I think the least interesting is Mahomes, just because I feel like I already know so much about Mahomes, and I am kind of already like indoctrinated with his life. He definitely comes across as more personable in the show, and I feel a little
Yeah.
bit more of a connection to him. And I think choosing Mahomes is still a great decision, especially when you keep in mind that the goal is to introduce people to football. Like that's what I show. Like if I'm trying to get someone into football, like I'm trying to get my girlfriend into football, I'd show her Mahomes highlights because it's like this is what the peak of the sport is. Um, it's Mahomes. So the fact that like I can go into that second episode and you see the clip of him, like it's the him against the Bucks where he does like the insane juke, like spins around the defender, shovel pass in the back of the end zone. If you've seen the play, you know what I'm talking about. But like that, I think it was really important to have Mahomes in there just so people can see what that aspect is all about. Like you can see the wow moments and you can see why people would love to watch him in a game. But in terms of personality, it's not the best. But um, Kirk Cousins definitely my favorite, and Mariota. I think it was interesting. I just like less so like Mariota is a very likable guy. He's not like overloading with personality or anything. I just thought it was really interesting, and I've heard rumblings that it gets even more interesting with him being benched later on. I haven't quite gotten that far, but I think the position that he's in is someone on the fringes of the like starting 32. I thought that was a really interesting way to do it. I thought the three perspectives of having a superstar, having like an average to above average quarterback, and then having your fringe guy. I thought that was a good balance to strike. Overall, in terms of personality, yeah, I'd like to go back to the original question. I'd like Kirk Cousins more, but I think they overall had pretty decent choices for what they could have done. And even though I didn't love Mahomes or Mariota's stuff as much, I think it was still a good way to balance it out.
Yep, and you're making my job really hard because you're saying all the same stuff that I was going to say. I was about to say, I think that that's one of the things they did an excellent job doing. Obviously, when you're looking at it from the perspective of somebody who doesn't know a lot about football, having Mahomes or just an overall Pro Bowl quarterback is so important. You need to have that guy who's going to be able to show you the elite of the elite. But the thing is, like you said, it's important to have almost three different angles, or else it just kind of gets boring. Like you couldn't have had done this show with like Mahomes, Burrows, and Allen, right? Like it just wouldn't have been interesting, right? It's just wouldn't have worked as well. Which is why I think they did an excellent job. You brought in the elite guy. You brought in somebody who's I don't want to call him middle of the pack because I think he's slightly above that, but a personality to kind of like mix everything in, and then you're bringing in the guy who's really fighting for his job, who's making his way back into the league, and you get to hear the story of somebody who hasn't necessarily had the easiest time, right? Which it mixes very well, and it's a big reason why I think it was so successful with this. Obviously, there's a lot of people who are saying it could have been better. I really liked it. I think it was really well done. I think that's kind of what you're saying too, from the perspective of introducing people to football. I think it's excellent. I think it's a great job. Obviously, they already announced that season 2 is going to be happening as well. I mentioned this a little bit to you before we started the segment. I'm curious who I asked you just to try and get a list in your head of guys who you would like to have for season 2. Who do you have and why?
Okay.
We'll just hop right into it.
Before I get to that, can I throw out another potential idea for a season 2 that I think would be even better than choosing three different quarterbacks? And that's going to be
Okay. Yeah.
I think if the idea is to introduce people to the sport, I don't think you should do a quarterback season 2. I think what you should do is move on to another position group. Think
And this
about
argument has been
receivers.
made.
Think
Yeah.
about receivers. Think about doing a show with like a Tyreek Hill, think because the receivers are the ultimate personalities. I'm thinking like a Tyreek Hill or Justin Jefferson is that superstar. Trying to think middle of the pack guys like a good Kirk Cousins similar person would be. He's definitely not middle of the pack, but would be like a Tyler Lockett, and then you pick some sort of up and coming third receiver. Like that would be a cool show. I would be much more interested in that than a quarterback season 2. But I don't know what you think of that idea.
Well, I definitely had heard that because that's not something that hasn't been thrown out there. I don't know if it's necessarily been talked about on the level of that, actually talked about whether it would happen or not, or whether it's just people throwing out ideas. But I don't hate it. I definitely would watch it. I really like the idea of bringing it back to quarterbacks again, just because it's the same idea of. I like the idea of now that we've seen the personalities of Kirk Cousins, Patrick Mahomes, and Mariota. I think it'd be really interesting to see the personality of more of these quarterbacks, just because I just find the position of quarterback so interesting in the NFL because of so many different reasons that I wouldn't have an issue seeing season 2. But I feel like I don't think you should wrap up this at one season. That's the one thing that I might disagree with you on. I think maybe you do a second season, bring a couple more guys through. Maybe you could even do. I know there's been talks about potentially having more than 3 guys in season 2, which would be interesting. But I feel like maybe do a second season, bring a couple more names through, and then once the gimmick gets old, then you move on to wide receivers or running backs or corners, what have you, right? Like you can move on to imagine if they did like even just a defense or something like that. Maybe you could even make it more broader, right? Where you just follow 3 defensive players, or even you could spread it out if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think I honestly like that last idea. I think that's a really good one. And I think honestly in hindsight I may have liked that more from the start instead of looking at 3 quarterbacks, just taking 3 players in general, or maybe even broadening it out because 3 players is a lot to limit it to. But like even if you do like maybe a Kirk Cousins and then you do a Tyreek Hill and then you do someone on the defense like a cornerback or something. Like I think that would be interesting. And I think one of the issues that they're gonna have if they want to look into that idea is the fact that they've already marketed it as quarterback. It's the quarterback show. It's not necessarily about the NFL. And I think they are a little kind of putting themselves in a box a little bit. I understand why they did it because it's the most marketable position, because it's the players that people.
It's also made by Peyton Manning.
It is also made by Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
But Peyton Manning couldn't have been nearly as good as he was if he didn't have Marvin Harrison. Like if he didn't have any of the.
That's fair. Yep.
Of the players around him. And think about Peyton Manning winning Super Bowl 50. He only did it because of that defense. Like, do you think Peyton Manning wouldn't want to give props to Von Miller? Like, I do think there should be a little bit more emphasis on the other positions going forward. Like, that's what I'd want to see. But I do get where you're coming from. I do think it's like a second season with all quarterbacks would still be interesting. I just think if the goal is to grow knowledge and interest in the sport, I think that expanding it to other positions would be a way to do it now that you've already had people hooked in with quarterbacks. And I think that honestly with the personalities of some of these guys, because quarterbacks are interesting in how much responsibility they have. It's the hardest position in sports. But they don't they're more similar to hockey players in how they're constantly taking responsibility. They're like you see their press conferences, they'll give stock answers similar to hockey players. That's not the same for receivers and cornerbacks. That would almost be a more interesting watch to me, just because of the different types of personalities that you see. But yeah, no, I think that would be where my argument for it would end. I just think it would make for a little bit more interesting TV, and I also think it would be a way to expand the knowledge of the sport. Just because, going back to the quarterbacks, if you do another 3, what different points are you going to hit? Because they're doing these themed episodes, what different points are you going to hit that you haven't hit already?
That is not something that I was thinking about. So when I asked this next question, you know what? I was going to say, let's spin it back. If you were to give 3 quarterbacks, what would you name? But that makes it harder because obviously when you're bringing it back to what themes would you try and hit, that's not necessarily something that I was thinking about. But now that you pointed out, that's a very, very important thing because obviously that is, that's a very, very good point. I wish I thought of that before coming up with names. But if you want to, do you have 3 quarterbacks?
Yeah, I can.
Or
I have
even
some
three
idea. I have
ideas?
some idea.
Okay.
So I'll go.
Let's hear it.
I'm gonna use the same structure as quarterback did. So I'm going a superstar. I'm going a above average, middle of the road, kind of, let's say 10 to 20 guy. Then I've got a borderline starter. I think the trickiest one to come up with is that 10 to 20 guy because I think you already have. I think they already picked the best person for that in Kirk Cousins, in terms of personality.
Yeah.
However,
You're not going to get a better Kirk Cousins.
No, you're not. But I think with this lineup, this would hit it out of the park. My superstar is going to be Joe Burrow. I think that if you're looking for personality, I just think of the clip of him smoking a cigar in the LSU locker room after they won the national championship. You're going to get it with Joe Burrow.
Oh, yeah.
And you are going to get some cool moments, especially in those big games. Like, that would be, I haven't watched the full show. I don't know if they've hit on, like, if you're looking for other themes, like the clutch factor, that could be something you could focus on with a Joe Burrow because that is his whole persona. That would be an interesting pick for me. That would be my superstar. I'm going to skip that 10 to 20 range because honestly, I'm having trouble finding someone. But I'm going to go to my lower end. And I think that one is an easy pick too. That I'm going with Baker Mayfield. And I think that
Ooh.
that would be
That would be
That would
interesting.
be a really interesting one because it's the same similar thing to Mariota. Drafted early, fell out of favor. You can examine why that happened. You can take a look at how, because it was playing through that injury that got him to this point. Playing through that shoulder injury took him from the Browns savior to having to fight for that job. And we've talked about this on the podcast at like why I think Baker Mayfield hate is a little bit overdone, but also just that personality. It's again like this is I'm trying to get a little bit more personnel, a little bit more, because none of these guys, none of Mahomes, Cousins, Mariota, they are not like going to be as self-confident as a Burrow, as a Mayfield. Mahomes will make a throw and like, yeah, you see him in the game. He is like talking his shit. Like he is bragging about it. But he's not going to do that in the press. He's not going to do that when they're doing the interviews for the show. I can see a Burrow, I can see a Mayfield doing that because I think of Baker Mayfield. I don't remember what the opposing university was, but planting the flag in the middle of the field. Like, it's stuff like that. Mayfield, like, he has that swagger. I think that would be interesting. And then to bring it to my middle of the pack guy, I'm tempted to go Geno just because of
That's who I thought you'd go
my bandwagon, but there would be more interesting people than Geno. I think you've missed the boat on Geno, honestly. It would be the most interesting season for him would be this year.
But obviously, there's no way they could have known.
There's no way they could have known. I think a potential.
I mean, you
one
could make
that'll-
the argument that they could have replaced Mariota with him.
Yeah, but
But-
I think that would have made for an more interesting show. But again, that's not any of their fault. They couldn't have.
There's no way they could have known. Yeah.
I'm throwing it up between two players for me. I'm looking at Justin Fields and Dak Prescott as my kind of middle of the road. They're on the higher end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
obviously, like similar. to Kirk Cousins.
In my head, I was also thinking Dak. For that middle guy, I feel like Dak is one of those guys who would slide in pretty well because he has that personality. And I'm sure I'll let you take it, but he definitely has that personality. He slides it right in pretty perfectly. I was thinking along the same lines with that one.
Yeah, I would go between Dak and Fields. I think Fields has more personality, but I do think that like just the football culture of Dallas is a more interesting thing to analyze.
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure. And so your three guys would be Burrows, Dak, and what was the last one? Mayfield. That's right. That would actually be interesting. I actually had a similar idea. I think I like the idea of Burrows for basically all the same reasons. He is like the perfect, like elite quarterback who's going to give you all the personality you could ever ask for. I feel like you could also slide in a guy like Allen. I feel like for the same reason almost that you said Dak with Dallas, just that Buffalo, just everything around that team, and they're going to be really good this next year as well. Like everything around Buffalo and Allen, I think that'd be super interesting too. You took Dak, so I'm going to take off Dak just because I feel like that's done. I feel like I could probably throw in a guy like Tua. I feel like that'd be interesting. I feel like I've always been interested by just Tua in general, and I feel like you could even just you could just have that conversation about how he's the only left-handed quarterback left in the NFL. That's interesting enough to me, that whole thing. And then for the third thing, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. Instead of bringing in a guy veteran on the fringe, I feel like it'd be interesting to have like a rookie. I really like the idea of having a rookie quarterback, which is something that I've been thinking ever since I started watching the show. Imagine if they brought in a guy who is straight out of college, who doesn't really know what to expect with the NFL, and you just throw a bunch of cameras at him. Wouldn't that be funny?
It would be funny.
Like-
I think the teams would be up in arms about that, though. They would not. Be
Oh, I'm sure. Oh, I'm sure. It won't happen. But I'm just think about it. Imagine if you have
It would be Bryce.
let's say we have
It would be
Burrows.
Bryce Young.
Let's say no. You sure? But let's say for this example, let's say it's not Bryce Young because I want the rookie who would be. I want a rookie who's like gonna be like blinded by the lights. You know what I mean? I like the contrast of having Joe Burrow, obviously cool as a cucumber. You're gonna say what you want about Joe Burrow. Let's say you throw Dak in there, another personality. You're gonna have no issue there. Then you just have like a guy who doesn't know what he's doing. Like, wouldn't that be incredible? Just like I love the idea of that. But I mean, you could even have a guy like Bryce Young. I just think the idea of having a guy, obviously, it'd be a very different contrast between seeing how he prepares for games compared to a veteran quarterback and how like he handles the coaching and how even the coaches coach him, right? That'd be a very different thing. And I feel like that contrast would make it interesting. But also just having a guy complete newbie, I think that'd be great.
You know which quarterback you can pick to where you would, because like I really like that idea too, and I think that would be
Kyle
potentially even
Trask.
more interesting. No, Kyle Trask maybe. I was thinking different, where it's a person's first year starting. There's a lot of pressure on him. Probably like doesn't have a ton of in-game experience. First round pick. But technically not a rookie. He's been in the league for like 3 years. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Oh, Jordan Love.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Yeah,
I'd like that
could be
actually.
interesting.
I feel like that would be interesting. Yeah. I actually, you know what? Now that you say that, I feel like that almost works better. That'd be a super interesting show because you could also just have the parallel of imagine if you did this, and hear me out on this, your elite guy replaced with Aaron Rodgers. And all of a sudden you have that contrast and you could really build around that. That'd be an interesting show.
That would be good. And Rodgers would be another good personality to put in there too. Like he would be. I think the elite guys.
When I was thinking that, in my head I was thinking Rodgers. I was thinking for that elite guy, Rodgers would be pretty much perfect. But I like the idea of having a young guy, which is I feel like probably why you said Burrows as well, partially. Like I think it's important to have a guy who's going to be in the league for a couple like years to come because you want to have a guy who, let's say, because this is going to be on Netflix for God knows how long, right? You don't want a guy who's going to be out of the league in 3 years, in my opinion, right? Obviously, at least not for your elite guy.
Yeah, and I think you have a lot of leeway to choose from that too. Like it's not like there's so many players who are on their last legs, but the counter argument to that would be like I understand you want to have someone who you can market the league to for a long time. But I do think that a player like Aaron Rodgers has enough name recognition to draw people in, and also after he retires, for people to be like, "Oh, I knew who that was. Like, I get this."
Yeah,
because
that's true. That's a very good point too.
And I do think it's another interesting perspective to show a guy at the end of his career. Like, I think that would be another interesting perspective to show because I think it's about showcasing different sides that the first season didn't. So
maybe you could have that would work even better with Jordan Love, obviously, when you point out something like that. Guy at the end of his career. Nobody knows how many more seasons A-Rod's going to play. But let's say this is his last dance. The contrast of having a rookie versus a guy in his last dance last year, he's making one more run at it. That'd be an interesting show. That'd be really interesting, right?
Yeah.
And then middle guy, you can slide in Kirk Cousins. Let's get more Kirk. Who wants more Kirk? Let's throw more Kirk for everyone, you know? I'd love that personally.
I would too. The one guy I'm just going to say it just because I do feel like it's too obvious to not just bring up the idea at least. The one other guy that I would really like to see in the show at some point is Lamar Jackson. As that superstar,
that'd be a good one.
That would be personality overflowing. Like he is awesome. And it would be a different side of it too to showcase that dual threat, because Mahomes, while he's awesome and has running ability, but it's more of a last resort for him.
And you also have to think about it as, I wonder what different training Lamar does just around having to game plan around the fact that he will be running a ton of game, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, I imagine that's going to be a little different. And again, you're moving back over. I feel like we could dance around this forever, so we should probably try and wrap this up. But if you move back over to doing a wide receivers one or even defense, imagine in that type of situation, I feel like you'd also get that, where you get to see that different side of the preparation and different side of all that, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can take it. I think that's the biggest thing that we've done a pretty good job emphasizing in the last 26 minutes. But I think it's really, I don't know if you can necessarily mess it up that bad unless you just make it entirely punters. But even that, I'd probably
That would be good. That
So-
would be a good show.
that would be good. But like, you know what I mean, though.
I would
Where like,
watch
I feel
that.
like that would get.
Punters.
You'd
are
watch
people
all 10?
too. Punters are people.
You'd watch all 10. But that's the thing. Oh,
Okay,
Listen.
Simon. As an ending for the segment, give me your 3 punters. Give me your 3 punters.
what do you mean by 3 punters? Top 3 punters?
No. 3 punters that you would like to see featured on the punter show.
Ooh, okay. Dixon, for sure.
Yes, easy.
Seahawks, don't care. Dixon, throw him there. Oh, you're throwing me on the spot here. Who else is a punter?
Can Simon
Who's
name 3 punters?
God, crack. Me and you aren't going to be friends at the end of this game if I don't like you anymore. Why am I thinking that Hecker's
Hecker is still.
a punter?
Hecker is still in the league.
Hecker's a
We can do
punter.
Hecker.
Why did I think he was a kicker? Okay.
No,
Hecker's a punter.
Hecker's a punter.
And make Pat McAfee come out of retirement. And let's end the thing here. End it there. Sweep the